What's interesting with the story of an American in Paris that takes place after World War II is that, in fact, Americans had been coming to Paris since the 19th century, of course, from the time of the American Revolution and the French Revolution, when the two countries helped each other and were inspired by each other. And what's interesting is that during a period when, in fact, from the middle of the 19th century, there are massive migrations of Europeans going to the United States, at the same time, Americans start coming to France for different reasons. So artists, writers, but also business people. And before World War I, there will be a stream of Americans bringing their products and wanting to sell them. After World War I, in particular, there is a great increase. There's a sense that this is the new frontier also economically. So there are many Americans who come, or some of them former soldiers, who come to do business. And this will create a community of Americans in Paris that are not just the writers and the artists, but who are those who come to sell America. As we move into the period between the two wars, is an increase of another category of Americans who come to Paris, which are very important and which are also sort of represented in the story of an American in Paris. And these are former soldiers. Jerry Mulligan, he was a World War II soldier, and he fell in love with France and decided to stay. I think that the general vision of Paris and of France is one of openness, is one of greater liberty. Certainly there were women, like men, who were able to do things in Paris that they couldn't have done at home. New forms of sexuality, or that they could be more open about, or at least within their circles. They could also experiment with forms of writing, with forms of cultural and literary interactions, which they felt that they couldn't do in the United States.
An American in Paris by Vincente Minnelli focuses on a new generation arrived in Paris between the years 1945 and 1947. Most of them were influenced by what was called the lost generation, we should say. So young artists and writers who came between the two world wars. The most famous being Ernest Hemingway or Francis Scott Fitzgerald, who also wrote a lot about their experience in Paris and created, we could say, something like a myth of Paris as a haven for American artists where to find inspiration and also support. Most of the artists also who came after the Second World War were inspired by other examples of artists who came to get a training in Paris at the École des Beaux-Arts or in what were called private or free academies. There were many who came in the late 19th century, in the early 20th century and up to the early 1930s. So this was a strong example also for young artists to come after the Second World War. What was new, many of them were supported by the US government. They were veterans of the Second World War, benefited from the GI Bill. The goal was to help veterans to go back to civilian life. We could say the hero was actually what we would call a GI Bill student. He spends his time in Paris thanks to the US government, as he says. So he's really an example of this young generation, but in a completely new context, where the US power was much stronger and where it appeared also a bit outdated for some artists to go to Paris, as New York became the new mecca of the arts. What is interesting in Minnelli's movie, it plays on older, you could also say outdated references. The main aesthetic references are from the Belle Époque paintings. You could see clearly reference to Toulouse-Lautrec and Raoul Dufy. So it plays, you could say, on a popular image of Paris. It also plays on stereotypes, to put it simply, that were also conveyed by the touristic industry. Paris became really the main destination for American tourism after the Second World War. And that explains also why his hero lives in Montmartre, which at the time in 1950 was not the main artistic center. The GI Bill artists, most of them lived in Montparnasse, which was, as before the Second World War, the main artistic center. The reason why Jerry Mulligan, the hero of the movie, lives in Montmartre is probably because the picture of Montmartre is most famous in American popular culture. So Minnelli really combines references to a generation that was in Paris in 1951, but references also to a lost generation vision of Paris, and even you could say to a very Belle Époque vision of Paris, to please probably the American audience. Minnelli's movie was first, we could say, a huge success at the time. It was awarded several Oscars. The budget was huge also. It was all shot in Hollywood, actually, not in Paris, but the stage was really precisely copied from Paris, you know, real streets, etc. So you have a sense you are in Paris, but in a somewhat outdated Paris when you watch the film. Minnelli's movie inaugurated a type of new tradition of what was called French films. So films made by Hollywood, produced by Hollywood, but that took place in Paris. Paris as the city of love, especially. You can think of movies with Audrey Hepburn, for instance. So although it is a tribute to Paris and Parisian avant-garde, this movie also shows American talent because of the music, Gershwin's music, and also because of the acting and dancing talent of the main hero played by Gene Kelly. So it really showcases also what the United States can bring to a sort of transatlantic, if not universal culture, by drawing on Parisian culture and adding this really uniquely American element and the sort of what American would say joie de vivre, something that would represent the Americans in this, you know, liberation period after the Second World War. This kind of optimism that American artists, including movie actors, jazzmen, American musicians, embodied at the time.